sure that we're kind of, I want to make sure that we're kind of all on the same page as to what needs to happen, what we're expecting. And if we have some questions that require an in-depth conversation or more info, I'd like to table those questions for another meeting. That way we can get through hopefully this entire list today. And we can kind of get this behind us so we can get the estimate done and kind of get the scripts tested and stuff like that. So the first thing is that I have this one tab in here called Lookup Tables. The roles, the group roles, the VIP roles, and the countries. Those are the ones that I saw. The new schema that you guys built allow for a description for each of the roles, which we currently don't have on the site. So during the migration, I just want to use the name as the description as well, until we can go into the admin tool and update that. So for example, the description of the athlete role would be athlete. So as we go to populate those lookup tables, let's do that for the roles where the name and the description are the same. And then Greg and or I or someone can modify those descriptions, which I presume is in the admin.
Yes, it is. It is.
So we'll be able to update those as we need to. The country list is a country list that I believe is pretty complete. I basically pulled it off of Wikipedia. That's where that came from. So we may as well populate all of the countries right away. I think what I like to do, and I'm not sure how the app behaves, but we should probably default any country selection, not default it to be the United States, but I think the United States should be at the top of the list somehow. Obviously, if you sort countries alphabetically, that's not going to happen. And I don't know, I don't think that's a significant change, but that's what I'd like to try to do. So when we get the list of countries that you can choose from, United States would be at the top of that list. So those are the lookup tables. Now going through like all of the data that needs to be migrated, there are some questions that I have because I didn't quite understand how you implemented something in the new schema. Some of the functionality I think that we have data for might not be in the current app, and some other questions like that. So hopefully those aren't significant. I tried to highlight significant elements in either yellow or kind of a pink red color. So we'll pay special attention to those things. The sports table, I did a little review of that. Greg and I are going to have to work through this, but his list is not ready to be used as is. So Greg said he wants to go through that list and kind of match them to what's in production now. I already kind of did some of that, found some duplicates, found some things that might be missing from his list, etc. So Greg and I have to work on the sports before we know exactly how we're going to handle that. So let's kind of set that aside until Greg and I can give further direction. But in the meantime, you guys can assume that we will have some sort of list, a CSV file or something for you to populate the sports with, as well as a cross-reference to the existing sport in the production database, so that you know how to do the conversion from a production sport ID to one of the new IDs. So we'll set aside sports for now, and we'll just know that the sports will exist. And before we get to any of the other tables, one of the primary questions I had was, I'm not sure if you guys are going to keep your the identity column values that are in the existing production table, and then start your seed at the highest number after what we insert, or if you're going to just generate new ID numbers. So my assumption, which I'm sure you picked up on as you reviewed this, is that you're going to be creating new ID numbers when you do the migration. If that's not the case, then obviously some of my comments will change. Any questions to this point?
John, we will be creating the new IDs. We will be starting with 1.
Okay. So when you, for example, if once we start dealing with the users, you'll migrate the users over, they'll all have new IDs, and then any of the corresponding data will be updated with that new ID number. Yes. That's kind of the expectation that I had as well. And that is kind of how I geared most of my comments. So let's go through these kind of line by line, just to make sure that everything is clear. So in the users table, these are the columns that we need to retain or migrate. For each table, the top row doesn't have a column name, and that's simply because I'm identifying some special case for that table. So the users table, I've pulled out a handful of IDs that I know are developers. Some of them are your IDs based on your emails. One of them is mine, etc. So those specific IDs I don't want to migrate. An example is, I don't really want to migrate my data because when we launch the new site, I want to be able to sign up from scratch. There's nothing in my account that's that important as far as keeping my data. So you would exclude, my ID is 4776. So we're just not going to migrate any of those IDs. The other thing is Greg's ID is 3927. And he's got a lot of data under his account that he wants to maintain. We don't, Greg's not going to want to have to go through and rebuild his profile and all the groups he's in, etc. And there's a lot of content based on his name. So when Greg's account gets migrated, we're going to have to do whatever to set the flag that he's a system administrator. I don't know if you're going to have his ID, like his record already in there as, ID 1, for example, set up as an admin. And if that's the case, you'll have to merge his data to the new ID. So we just have to know that Greg's account is a special case that we need to address. The created at date, Greg, this is something I'd like for you to kind of give some thought to and come up with an answer to. If the user's account was created before a certain date, and the flag, there's a column in this table called first time. And if first time is set to 1, that means that they've never logged in after they created their account. And this is, Greg, where I think the question you have to think about is, do we want to migrate these people? I think we don't, but there should be a time constraint. So anybody who has signed up prior to January 1, 2021, if they've never logged in again, we just should not migrate their account. So that's something, Greg.
My feeling is I would go back further. I think that we should go back, not just this year, but I would say from January 1, 2019 forward because that's a lot of people that I spoke with who signed in and are very likely candidates for using the site as I've been primping everybody for when we launched the new site for over a year now. So I'd like to leave them on for a
And you
couple years.
think
I
that
would
they
say
never,
January 19.
and you think that they never logged in after originally signing up?
Yeah, because they signed up, they looked around, and then they said, well, and then I would tell them, okay, we're waiting for the new site, and then they would be sitting on their hands. But I don't think it's going to hurt too much. The only people who it's going to who are going to be left from those couple of years are prospects and all those people that need to be erased because of they signed in for the
Okay.
reasons.
So I added the date there. So we're going to exclude people who were created before a certain date and the first time flag is true.
Yeah.
Okay. Email address for the users. Actually, we're going to pull this email address, and I'd like to know if you guys in the script can check to make sure that it's not a malformed email address. So if it's not really a valid email address, I don't think we should migrate the account because there's not much we can do with that person.
Agreed.
The name of the user, we want to exclude adult, anything that contains the word adult or dating or HTTP, which is where someone put a URL in as their name. So we're going to exclude those people. Because, and we'll see this with the profile table, but when you migrate the name field, it should go into the first name field because this was an original email and name, and the name was only in one field. So your first and last name were in the same field. If a user's account is disabled, we're not going to migrate. We're going to exclude that user from the migration. Last login, we're going to exclude any accounts where the last login is this date in 2014. And that is a default date that was set for accounts prior to Greg purchasing the site. So if there's that specific date and timestamp for the last login, that means that this account pre-existed and has never been used since. So we don't want to migrate those accounts. They're obsolete. They're from a prior iteration of the site, etc. The birthday, if a person is under 18 and the user ID does not exist in the profiles table, we are not going to migrate that user. We're going to exclude them from the migration. The reason for this, Greg, is when you had someone under 18, there was to be a profiles table created. And if there wasn't, that means they were under 18 prior to you buying the site, like back in 2014, 2015, which means they're over 18 at this point now anyway. And they're not using the site. So that's an exclusion that we'll do for the users. The next two tables, email address and profiles, were something that were added on to allow for a one-to-many relationship between users and email addresses, for example. That functionality was never implemented in the UI. But the key is that not every user has a record in email addresses. And that is why when we migrate the users table, we're going to capture that email. But if they have an email address in this email address table, we're going to overwrite whatever we migrated from the users table. And the is primary column in this table, if it's not a 1, for example, it's a 0 or null, we're not going to migrate the user. We're going to exclude that user.
Have you figured out what that means? That is primary? Do we know what?
Yeah,
what that
because
was for?
if you would put in, oh, these are my other email addresses, you would identify which is your primary contact email.
Okay.
I got you.
That's what it's for. So all of them that are in there should be a 1. But if we find one that's not, that means that it was a test record or something during testing or development that got kind of left over. The profiles table was also created but never really implemented. It was to allow a one-to-many relationship between users and profiles so that I could have a separate profile for different groups, for example. And as this was built, there are users, but not all of them, that will have a profile record. So if the user account, when you go through the profiles table, you know, obviously this BNU is where I was talking about the ID numbers. You're going to use the new user ID that's generated to identify their data. And if the user record doesn't exist, you're going to exclude it because the profile is an orphaned record that got left over. A user account, for example, got deleted, but the profile record did not get deleted. But this is where the names were broken out into first name, last name. So when we take the first name and last name from this table, we're going to overwrite whatever we might have taken from the users table, because this would be a more up-to-date, more accurate record for people that have a profile table. We're going to migrate description, country, postal code, the address, the city, state, home phone number. Now, one of the things that I had a question here was on the address.
Okay.
It looked like the address field was a text field in the new schema, and I did not see a column for city.
I think in the current system, we don't have a field for city. If required, we can make that implementation. Hello, John.
Yeah, I think we need to do that, because essentially you have state, postal code, country, and the only things missing are a mailing or street address and the city. And we have those broken out currently in our system, and I'd like to maintain that.
Okay, you need 2 fields, right? You need a city column as well as street address.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, I will implement that.
The
birthday.
John?
Yes.
If we have one question, sorry for interrupting. If we have the city, or rather, if we have the zip code, can we cross-reference that with the database and put in the city, or do we really need to?
We have the actual city, so I don't know why you would.
Well, I mean, if we don't, if there's a database record that does.
Well, you could, but a zip code can oftentimes marry up or reference more than one city name.
That's true. Okay, so yeah, and that's what we care about is really the zip code when we use that geolocation. So that's fine. That's fine. Just curious. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay. The birthday, also, we had taken that from the users table. And in this case, if the user's profile is under age 18 and their parent, which is this column here, if that parent ID does not exist in the users table, we want to exclude that user. Greg, just so you understand, the reason we do that is because if the person is under 18 and identified a parent, and that parent never signed up to approve them, we don't want them in the site because they were never approved to use
That's
it.
the danger mouse in the first place. Yeah, I agree. Also, if the parent's birthday is under 18, then there's something fishy going on, and that should be irrelevant.
What was that?
If the parents if the parent associated with the under 18 child is also under 18, then that can't happen. So that person should be excluded too. But that's another reason why that person would be excluded.
So you're saying you have a 17-year-old parent whose child
Exactly.
is
17.
on the site.
Exactly. So they, kids could be fooling around and putting down their parents or their friends as parents. So we should have a way to double check that or check them.
All right, I'll give that some thought.
Okay. It'd be a weird one and a rare one, but
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be in there. The profile table contains a role which would be that although we have this in our database, we're not really using it because the roles are assigned by sport for our users. And I think that there was a column called user in the new users table called role, but I think that was when we had that mandatory data new, and we were originally going to have the person pick a role when they first signed up.
Yes.
And we eliminated that. So I believe that column's not being used in your schema. Is that correct?
Yes, we are not using that.
Okay, so I'm going to mark that as not using, and we don't migrate that data. The various notification types are going into these columns. These are the values that we're using.
Okay.
0 is off or none. 1, of course, is email. Additional numbers when we add SMS would be 2 or something. The default notification types had to do with the person's preferences, and we need to verify these values. I'm not sure offhand what the individual values in the database mean, so I'm not sure how they get mapped to the new system. So that is something that we'll have to follow up on.
Okay.
The show in directory column is something that I did not find in the new schema, but I believe that we eliminated the user directory completely from the site. Is that correct?
Yes, we have not considered that feature in the current implementation.
Okay. And then there are some columns related to the parent. I didn't see any way that this was implemented in the new schema. And this is where I had a question because I didn't understand how that would map out. And I don't think we really talked through or really witnessed in a demo the parental approval process. So is that something that's in this release?
We haven't considered the parent approval because during the initial discussion, I think we discussed that in some countries the age limit is different than 18. So we will come up with a solution at a later point.
Okay. We need a way then to retain this data in the new schema. I don't want to have to go back to the old data and migrate it again and run a script to extract it later. So I would like to capture this data, even if we're not going to be using it. It can be in a table that's separate on its own so that it, can be managed separately. But we definitely need to retain these 6 data elements.
Yeah, on this front, there seem to be 2 standards. I had a big discussion with a lawyer about this, an international lawyer, and they said that in the United States they use COPA, which is the standard, and in Canada they also use that, and in Europe and most of Asia and Africa they're using European standard. That one standard they use there, and it's called UFA or something. I don't know what it's called, but it's what they use in actually India as well. So I think if we know what that's one standard. So if we can do that, that would give us at least a base to go from instead of not doing it at all. Because it is very important for us to make sure we know who the minor is and that we're getting the parents involved as well.
Yeah, I mean, if it's not in place now, Greg, that's the whole.
I think it should be. I'm very surprised if it isn't, because we have it set up to do that.
Yeah, the whole process we had defined. I mean, there's going to be no way for us to split out initially based on various laws of various countries. That was something that I know that we talked about putting off because of how extensive that is.
Well, it's going to be a dog if we don't do this originally. You're right, John. We have to sort of keep these records available, even if it's in the background. But we need to have a way, a process to do that from the start. If we have a 13-year-old signing up, we need to get a hold of the parents.
I think the question then, Greg, is do we have to delay the launch of the site to implement this feature?
Oh, so what do we do if we have a 13-year-old who signs up?
Maybe you don't let them sign up at this time.
No, we got to have them
until we get
too many. And then we have to delay the launch. We don't really have a choice. We need.
Okay, can we table this discussion till Wednesday on what we do with the parental approval? Jibin?
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah,
We can do that.
John, by that time I will have a discussion with Milan also.
Okay. I know that this process is complex, and I think if our focus is initially to implement it to meet the United States laws, that's the most critical aspect at this point.
Sure.
So keep that in mind as you guys talk about it, that we're not necessarily looking for a global solution yet, but we do need one for the United States. And then let's discuss that. In the meantime, as far as the migration goes, let's make sure that we keep this data And there are the exclusions here, which is for all of these fields, if the user is 18 years of age or older, we're going to exclude this data because it's no longer relevant.
Okay.
And then there's some other criteria that I included. And as you can see, Banu, I worded it, you know, I'm a database guy too. So I worded it in such a fashion that should be able to craft your criteria. If you have specific questions about the criteria, you can simply just send me a message on Slack or an email, and I'll deal with that directly with you.
Okay.
The avatars are basically a person's profile picture. The profile ID, this profile ID correlates to the profile table. It doesn't correlate back to the user's ID. But when you guys migrate it to the new database, it goes into the user's table. So it'll be matched up with that person. The parent ID in this table, we are not migrating that data, and we're gonna exclude any record where the parent ID is not null. The parent ID in this case is a hierarchical relationship. So when a user uploaded a profile picture, a thumbnail was generated at a certain size and a preview image was generated at a certain size. And those records in the database contain the parent ID to the original photo. So a parent ID is a key back to the avatars table as well. So if the parent ID is not null, you're going to exclude that record because that means it's a thumbnail or preview or some other format of the same photo. The file name is simply a file name. I believe that your schema is maintaining the full URL for the photo image. So we're going to have to craft the URL during the migration based on the file name in the database.
Okay, John, one question.
Yep.
Are the file names maintained in an S3 bucket?
Wait, can you repeat that?
Are the existing system using the S3 buckets to save the files?
Yes.
Okay. So we will have to find out the complete URL using the logic, and we will have to migrate those file names.
Correct. Now, there's kind of a secondary thing related to the migration is that once we migrate the data, you know, one of the steps that we need to do as well is migrate the photos from the old servers to the new servers. And I don't necessarily, depending on the actual migration process and how we plan it, we could always move those images at a later time and then do an update to the URLs in the database. So I'm not leaning one way or the other as to the timing of the physical files from one server to the other. I would be comfortable migrating the files between the servers at a later time once we know that kind of the migration of the data is done and the system is running properly. So I'm not like opposed to doing it at a later time. So when we build that URL, you could build it either to the new URL or the old URL, but that'll be driven by our decision as to when do we move the actual physical files. Okay, then there's a table called Profile Sports. And of course, the profile ID refers back to this profiles table, which is how you identify the user. And in all cases, anytime there's a reference back to a user, if that user record doesn't exist for some reason, because we excluded the user because the email address was malformed or whatever, we're not going to migrate these sports because the user, of course, doesn't exist. So I'm assuming that the script will reject that data, that when you go to insert this data in and you find that there's no user ID, that it's just going to ignore that data. So there's the profile ID, which is how you identify the user. There's a sport ID. And if that sport does not exist, you're not going to migrate this record for that user. I'm not sure that that's ever going to happen, but it is conceivable that there was a sport in the system, the sport got deleted, and you still have somebody with a profile for that sport. Then there's 5 columns, which are basically that person's role for that sport. And these are the 5 roles that are in the new lookup table. So you guys will have a new, you guys have a new table of roles, which are basically consist of all of these. These are the original 11. I think Greg may tweak these names a little bit, but nevertheless, those are the roles that we're going to migrate. So if a person, these are all just a single bit, so it's a true or false. So if they're a player, you're going to use the role for athlete. If they're a pro, you're going to insert a record for the role professional, coach, parent, etc. Is that clear?
Yes, John, it's clear.
Okay. User updates. These are, of course, the updates somebody puts on their profile that says, oh, I did this today, or, you know, something's happening in my life, whatever. It seems as though there's a lot of empty strings that are in the database, which I think means that somebody deleted the update, and for whatever reason, the production system doesn't delete it. It just overwrote it with an empty string. So if the description, if that user update description is null or empty or white space, we're going to exclude it. We don't want to move it over. Tabs. This was kind of confusing as I went through our data for tabs. But the tabs table itself has a user ID, which is how you'll find the user, the name of the tab, and specifically the one question I had is, how are we handling default tabs? So each of our pages has a series of default tabs, and I wasn't sure if you guys have a default tabs table, but I'm not sure if that's being used. In any case, I don't want to get into the discussion of how they're being handled right now, but that is a question because it certainly will impact.
John, I think we are having, we are creating a set of system tabs, and we are using the not function to iterate on those tabs and create the default tabs. I think there is around 7 or 9 default tabs, and whenever a new group is created, we will be using those functions to create those default tabs.
Okay, so the default tabs will not be stored in the database for the user, correct? Let me say this a different way.
Hello?
Yeah, okay. When I looked at the data in the home tabs table, what I found is that all of the users have not just their custom tabs, but also have all of the default tabs, like my social media and whatever else. So that's kind of where my question is, because if social media is a default tab, when you do the migration, you want to exclude any tab name that's actually one of the default tabs. So let's leave it at that for now. And just note that we have to make sure that we're not duplicating tabs. So in the home tabs, if I have social media, because it's a default, I don't want to end up with 2 tabs that say social media. You know, that's the concept, and that's what's in my head is, and we just have to be aware of that. The tab type is either website or video, which really drives the nature of how the URL is crafted and whether or not it uses the home videos table for the videos. And that distinction between a website tab and a video tab was an enhancement after there was already data in the table. So any tab type that is null or empty be assumed to be a website tab. The subtabs actually contain 2 different types of data. There are subtabs for the tab type website, and there are subtabs for the tab type video. And there may be a more efficient way to do this, but in a simple way of describing this is, as you parse through the home subtabs table, we're only going to use when the home tab ID is tab type website or potentially null or empty. That's what you're going to use to filter the home subtabs table once. Then you're going to go through and you're going to filter out for just the video, where the tab type for the home tab is video. And as with some of the other data, sometimes the title or website name of the tab is empty or null. And I believe that's how the old system deleted things. So if it's empty or null, we're going to exclude that subtab.
Okay.
And then for subtabs that are of type video, we'll have this data in the home videos table. I'm not sure how exactly videos was implemented on your end, but it looks like there's one video table no matter who uploads the video. So keep that in mind, that I wasn't sure how you implemented it. And when I looked at the schema for the videos table, some of the data types are weird. Some of the, like, there wasn't really a foreign key. So I'm not sure if that was exactly how you guys planned to implement it or what. But the videos, the subtab ID, the home subtab ID column tells you which subtab it goes on. Obviously, if we've excluded it for some reason because it was, let's say the title was empty, we're going to not migrate that record, that video. The user column in the new videos table, and this is kind of where my lack of understanding of what you did or what your plan is somehow you're going to inherit the user ID from one of the previous.
It is actually the user ID, but while creating the migration, the programmer used the word user. That is why it is a bit confusing.
Okay,
It should actually be user ID.
okay. And as with other things, if the title or the URL are empty, we're going to exclude those records. We have the created date, and then there was the ability to put those videos in a certain order. And I didn't see that we had that implemented. That's not an issue. We don't necessarily need to address that now, but I did want to keep it in the list to know that it's something we have to address later.
Okay.
The other thing is there's a flag that says whether a video should show up on the home page. I'm not sure what logic is behind the video on somebody's profile page, but I didn't see that that was implemented either. At least not that the user can control the preference of saying this one can be there, this one can't be there, etc. That's fine. I'm not suggesting we implement that, but I just wanted to note that for the
Yeah,
record.
John, on mine, I was able to do that. In fact, if you look at my personal home page, I do have a video up there, and I was able to put videos into my video list. So I did do that on mine. I think it's going to be very important for when we're talking to people who want to be recruited and other people who want to show off what they've done. So like a brag page. So just
Well,
keep that
Greg,
in
let
mind
me
as we're going
ask
along.
you, Greg,
Yeah.
is it letting you specifically say this video can show up there and this one doesn't show up there? Like
Yeah, I was
individually?
actually, yeah, basically the way it's set up is that it said right there, make homepage video. So that made it the primary page, the primary video that you see when you first go onto my homepage.
All right, so Banu, you know, I didn't see a column for that, but again, I may have overlooked that or something. If you can verify that.
Okay. In some case, that may be a missing feature we missed to implement. That can be implemented in the iterations.
Okay.
Great.
And then the last table that's related specifically to users is the table called contacts. The contacts are basically a user's friends list. So one of the key things to note is as we go through this contacts table, if the user was excluded for some reason or doesn't exist, or the friend doesn't exist, we're going to ignore that record and exclude it from the migration. There's a column in there called group ID, and that existed because the old system, when you joined a group, it actually considered that group as a friend. I'm not exactly sure, but why they would do it that way, except that it probably made some of their queries easier when they were displaying news items for their feeds or whatever. So for our migration, if the group ID is not null, we're going to exclude that record. So we only want to migrate records that don't have a group ID and have a user ID and a friend user ID. The other thing that you'll see is when somebody requested to be a friend, when two people were connected as friends, there were two records put in this table. So when I was if Greg and I were friends, one record would have me as the user ID and Greg as the friend user ID. The second record would have those switched. I don't know that that's you know, the best way to do it, but I think you guys probably, and I'm not sure, this is you'll have to verify the logic, but you may only need one record to show that relationship. And that's why I'm saying exclude the second reciprocal record. So I don't know how you guys have built the system to use that friends table, but that's something you guys will have to consider.
I think in the current system also we are using the same method, the reciprocal method, because that makes querying the friends list very easy. Let me check the codes and come back with a proper reply.
Okay. The other thing is we don't have really a record of who requested the friends in the production system. So I would like to just make the assumption that the user ID in the first record is who requested it. And then can you also check for foreign keys on those tables? I didn't see foreign keys.
Okay, sure, I will do it.
Okay, and that kind of covers us for all of the user-specific tables. Do you have any other questions to this point?
No, John. I just had only one column, one query, and that was related to the wrong data type usage, and that you had clarified.
Okay. Groups. The groups were relatively easy. I mapped out, most of the columns. The public member directory, that doesn't exist. The disabled column, we're not going to migrate that value. We're going to exclude people whose accounts have been disabled for some reason.
Okay.
The group type, we don't have a lookup table for group types. It's just a text column or a varchar column. Do you guys have a group type table?
We don't have a group type table, but we are using a numerical value like a group, multi-group, the training room, like that. We are using this value for indicating the type of the group.
Okay.
Whether it is a training room or not.
Okay, so I mean, somewhere then somebody has written down the reference between the type number and what the type is. And I'm not sure if that's just built into the code, but we will want to at some point make that a lookup table.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm surprised that was done in varchar instead of like a numerical value, like a regular group, or team would be 1, multi-layer group would be 2, that kind of thing. I'd be surprised if we didn't have that already set up like that. Seems very cumbersome.
There were 2 other columns that I saw did not have foreign keys. It was the groups user and the group sport were the 2 that I saw that needed foreign keys. You also have 2 columns that I wasn't sure how we were going to populate those. One is sports portal and one is training room. And I don't know that we have the data to populate that. And I believe to identify something as a sports portal, that's done through the admin panel of that group. And the training room,
actually,
I'm not sure.
John, on that, I was the only person who could actually start a sport portal. So all the sport portals that were started were only on my user ID. So if you see, you should never see sport portal except if you're in the add dashboard under my ID. But super admins, people who are running the site should have the ability to set up a sport, a group as a sport portal. There are only going to be, 200 of them at max, or, around that
Right.
number.
So, Banu,
So-
I think for that field, you may have to pull that from group type.
Okay.
When you see the value sports portal, whatever the syntax is of that value, that would identify a sports portal for you.
Okay. I think the in the new system, the sport portal and the training room, those values are Boolean because we are just flagging whether it's a sport portal or a training room.
Yeah, so as you go through and migrate the group, if the group type is the value sports portal, you'll set that flag to 1 as well.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Group members accesses, these are the settings that the group admin creates as to whether members can invite others, see the calendar, or invite others to events, photo albums, and they just simply go into your groups table. I did not see something for creating subgroups. Just a point
That
to
is
note.
missed actually. That is missed actually.
Yeah, and we don't need to necessarily correct that right now. We can deal with that later, but I did want to capture it in the migration. Group logos, like the previous user photos or avatars, the parent ID column is a reference to the original photo or image and is used to identify a thumbnail version. So if the parent ID is not null, we're going to exclude that record. And the URL for the images, same as with the user avatars or photos, we have to determine the full URL.
Okay.
And that goes into the icon field in the group table. Group tabs, subtabs, and videos, very similar to the user's setup for tabs, is you have these tabs. If the name is null or empty, we're going to exclude that tab. If the tab type is either website or video, if it's null or empty, we should convert it to be website. The inherit from and the is private columns, they all fit right into your tabs table. The subtabs are broken down by type for website type tabs and video type tabs. So when we migrate the data from subtabs, we're going to go through and we're going to look for simply if it's not a video type, we're going to do this particular migration. There were some columns that were not implemented.
Yes, the tab order. Yes, I remember. That is currently available in the live system. That is missing out.
Right. So that's fine, but that's the migration for the website subtabs. The video subtabs, of course, if there are no videos, so if we do a count of the videos that are related to that subtab and it's 0, let's not migrate the subtab record. And we're going to only include the type video when we go through this portion of the table.
Okay.
The tab type for the videos, of course, is not necessary because you're handling whether it's a URL or embed code differently, the tab order, the private, that's all fine. And these, of course, are the videos. There were some, as with the users, I talked about this before, the videos table, there's some data type and key questions. So we should just review that table to make sure that it's set up properly.
Okay.
Blogs, was really one table that contained all kinds of content, user content, group content, etc. So I envision, that you would parse through this table 5 times, basically. You may do it differently and have some more complex queries, however you go about it is really irrelevant to me, but to explain it and describe it, I did it as if it was 5 passes through the table. The blog entries that go into the curated content section of the group page is what I'm talking about when I say group blogs curated. This section, these are the ones that show up in the ambassador section of the group page. These show up on the ambassador section of the group page as well as the users page. Then you have blogs that a user enters, which only show up on their page. And then you have blogs that a user enters and they can choose to have it show up on a group page and it shows up in the member content section. So that's how I've defined these 5 types of blogs.
Okay.
With all of the blogs, of course, if the group ID is not one that got migrated or doesn't exist, we're going to exclude that blog. If the subject is empty for a blog, because not all blogs were required to have subjects, we're going to insert blog dated and a date in the format that I specified. That way there's a subject that's in there for that blog, and the group, whoever posted the blog, can update that subject later when they want to. But at least you won't have, when somebody's viewing a list of the blogs, we're not going to have an empty title on the screen.
Okay.
A blog can have a body or a video or both. So we are going to exclude the blog record if the body column and the video column are both null or empty. Because that means the blog was deleted. But only if both of them are empty. It is totally conceivable that you have a blog that contains just a video and no text in the body. The user ID, the content type, which goes into the blogs.type field in the new schema. And I don't know if you're using values or words.
We are using numbers.
Okay. So this would be whatever the type is for curated content. And we are only going to include if the content type is 0 in the production database. That becomes blog type curated. You also have a field for the blog URL, which we don't currently have. So I'm not sure if you can build a URL in your script, maybe do it in a separate script afterwards, or if you just omit it at this point. It's irrelevant to me, but we can't provide that from our existing database. So the next thing is ambassador blogs. And I saw that you had ambassador contents as a separate table. And I'm kind of wondering if that's necessary or if it can just be merged into the blogs table with just a different type. I'm not sure if that's a significant change. I'm not sure if there's other logic that requires you to keep them in separate tables. But to me, it seems like they can all go in one table.
Yeah, John, for clarification on that, the curated was if somebody else except if we're bringing in a blog either from outside URL, an outside blog, or if some other member on the site, not the ambassador, wrote a blog and the ambassador wanted to put it onto that sport portal. So that's why that would be curated.
Yeah, but the data still exists in our database.
Yeah, it should be. It should exist. So yeah, that would be a separate
John,
item.
John, we can keep all the data types in the blog table. I think the model ambassador content is old one. While we started the system design, we created separate tables. Then later we realized that we can manage the different types using a type field. So what you're suggesting is accurate. We can use the blocks table itself for keeping the ambassador content also.
Okay, so these columns would just switch out to be the blogs.
To
or
blogs.
the table
Yes,
to blogs.
exactly.
The content type, the production data for this type of blog is content type 1. And that would be whatever type is ambassador only.
Yes.
The ambassador and user type is 2. And I don't know what you guys call it on your end or what value it is, but that would refer to the ambassador and user blog.
Okay.
User blogs are similar. They have the same fields. They go to the same place. In our database, it's type 3. In your database, it's whatever type refers to user only.
Okay.
And then there's user blogs that also appear as member content on a group. Those are type 4. And that would be converted to whatever type you need to identify that.
Yes.
The blog photos refer to a blog ID. Of course, if the blog for some reason doesn't get migrated or doesn't exist, we're going to exclude the photo. And just like other photos and images, the file name URL would need to be built based on the server that it's on.
Okay.
The bulletins table are kind of posts that someone that manages the group posts, like what's going on with our group today, or here's a notice, etc. If the group for some reason doesn't exist, we're going to exclude that bulletin. If the user that created the bulletin doesn't exist, we're going to exclude that bulletin. We're going to retain the description, which is the bulletin itself. And you have a field for the name of a bulletin, which I guess is kind of a title or something.
Yes.
We
Yes.
don't really have anything for that. And I'm not sure whether the display accommodates an empty name, but certainly we wouldn't want to have like empty white space where that title or name would appear in the UI. So I'm not sure how we handle that. Maybe we do it in the same way that we did user updates, and that you put, update dated on whatever date it was created at.
Okay, we can follow the same pattern, because I think on the mobile apps we are using the title. If that particular screen comes without a title, that may be affecting the user experience. So we can create a title based on your previous suggestion.
Okay, I'm looking for. I don't see what I'm looking for, but let me just make a note of that. The active column for bulletins, we aren't migrating that column, and the same with expiration type. We're not going to migrate those columns because we're only going to take bulletins that are active and have not expired. So
Okay.
we want to only include the bulletin in the migration if active is 1 and the expiration type is not 2.
Okay.
And the is public, you have a visibility column. I don't know what your values are. I don't know how, if it's just a Boolean value, but you'll just have to map that to your new value.
Okay.
Group memberships, these are the members of a group, and you guys have a group members table and a user group roles table, and it looked like to me the user group roles is not being used, but you're going to have to verify this and make sure that my logic for this table is correct.
Okay.
So I've kind of written it under the assumption that user group roles may be obsolete. So we'll go through this carefully, but if the group ID doesn't exist, we're going to exclude the record. If the user doesn't exist, we're going to exclude the record. But when you do migrate that data, it looks like it goes into 2 tables. It goes into the group members table, and it goes into the group member roles table, is what it looked like to me. And then there's the question as to whether it goes into this user group roles table or not. So I don't know. I'm kind of guessing that my understanding of the new schema is not accurate when it comes to members. So Banu, I really need you to think about what I've written here and what tables it applies to. Because this is the one
Okay.
section that I think I'm the least certain of. Now, regardless of what tables are used, when we do migrate the data, the VIP column, if VIP is 0 or false, we want to use the group roles ID where the group role name is member. And if VIP is 1, we want to insert the group roles ID where the name is VIP. And the group roles are from the lookup table, which you guys already have populated. You know, you have those 3 roles already defined in the database. But that's what
Okay.
what we're looking to map, is that based on whether that's true or false, they're going to either be a member or a VIP. The VIP order was something that we discussed, I think, last week that did not get implemented. So that's something we can add later. So I just noted it here. We don't have to migrate that data. Then you have the various roles that someone has when they're a VIP. So all of these fields are only relevant if VIP is 1 or true. Okay. If the role coach is true, we're going to insert the VIP role for coach. Likewise, if team member is true, we're going to add the VIP role ID for team member, manager, parent, contributor. Then there were 2 free-form roles, so that if somebody put a VIP in and called them an Olympic champion or something, what I'd like to do is that if that VIP role does not exist, we're going to add it as a VIP role and then use that ID in the table. So all of the custom roles that are put in as free-form text fields, we're going to create a VIP role so that that can be selected via the admin panel for that group.
Okay.
And then Greg, for your reference, since we don't have custom roles, I think what we'll do is we'll have to craft a list of roles and add them through our admin panels. So that would
Yeah, that
have,
makes sense.
like, if you wanted to create a new role for someone like, you know, Olympic loser, you know, or whatever, you would have to add that through the admin panel before someone could use that in their group.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that's fine. If we, what did you find it to be problematic if we did have like a customizable section for VIP?
No, but I just don't think it's in there right now.
Okay.
So when we add it, that's fine. But I thought that this is the easiest way to deal with it, is we just create it as a role in the lookup table.
That's fine. Yeah, as long as we, you know, we have to make sure that during person's experience, they have a chance to send requests back to us as admins to make changes. And, you know, can you add me? Can you add this role in the group membership VIP thing?
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know.
we can do something like that as, you know, as one of the future changes. We talked about that before.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fine.
This is the easiest way to get it through the migration. We may have some things where somebody might have put in, like, you know, Olympic athlete, and someone else put in Olympian, and they would end up as two roles. But then you and I could kind of synchronize that stuff later.
Yeah, we're
You know,
starting off
they
small, so we
should
can
really
do that.
Yeah. Okay. And then there's, moving on, there's the group admins table. These are administrators of a group. And this is really just another type of role, group role, where we're going to go through this table and we're going to add the role ID where the role is admin. And that goes in the user group roles table. That's not considered a group VIP.
Okay. Got it.
Subgroups. These are relationships between two groups. Greg, these are not the Ubers and subs. The group ID and the subgroup ID, obviously, if either one of those are null or the group doesn't exist for some reason, we're going to exclude that record. And then these are the properties for those subgroups as to what can be merged or inherited, whatever terminology you want to use, and they correspond simply to these values. Group families was something that we talked about, I think, 2 weeks ago, where you have what are considered Ubers and subs, which in a way are similar to subgroups. So I don't know if that's being implemented as a subgroup, but I'm not sure where that conversation ended up going or landing, or whether we even followed up properly on it. But that's data that we are going to want to keep somehow, because we'll want to recreate these relationships when we address this issue. Now, I don't know if Banu, if that means we migrate it and hold this data in a separate table somewhere. So at least the group IDs, the parent and child, which are group IDs, are at least converted to the new group IDs. And that way we have the data retained with the appropriate IDs.
Okay.
I think that would be best if we can include it in the migration in a separate table, just like we're doing with something else, just so that we can maintain that data under the.
Yeah, sure.
And then the last thing is photo albums, which obviously are last because it depends on both the user's data and the group's data being populated. Photo albums is hierarchically the top level. Like you can't, in the existing production system, you can't add a photo unless you create an album. So if there's an album in the database that has no photos, we're not going to migrate that photo album. We're going to exclude it. You have the name, the description, and either a group ID or a user ID. The photos was actually the first thing I reviewed. So actually, I didn't realize this, but this exclusion is not up to date, but that'll be picked up because we've already excluded those users. Group members can contribute. The permissions created and updated. Permissions, these are the values we have for permissions as to where a photo can be made visible. If it's 0, it can be made visible on the group. If it's 1, it can be made visible through the calendar, which I don't understand, but that's what the value is. And if it's a 2, it can be made visible to Ubers, to subs, which at this point we don't have, and also UB Live, which I think is now called UB World.
The UB Universe, actually.
UB Universe. So those are the albums. The photos table will correspond to a specific album. There's a file for the image, for the photo, which we have to craft the URL for whatever server it's on. The parent ID for a photo should say exclude where not null. That's a mistake on my part. If the parent ID for a photo is not null, that means it's a thumbnail or some other variation of the original photo. And then, of course, a user ID for the photo. The user ID and the group ID control where the photo and photo album show up. This user ID is simply used for who uploaded the photo, which is something that I saw did not exist in the database, but we do need to identify, we need to create a field as to who created the photo or who uploaded the photo.
Okay, that we can add. We need a user ID in this table also. The way we planned was that we will be referring the photo album to the album, and we since we are having the album ID, and on the album table we are having the user ID. That's why we didn't include the user ID table, user ID field in this photos table.
Yeah, but here's what I see. At some point in the future, you may want to allow contributors to an album. So I might create an album, but I might want to allow other users to add photos.
Okay.
So more, if somebody uploads an inappropriate photo, we want to be able to know who uploaded that specific photo.
Yeah, got it.
Okay. And then photo captions, of course, correspond to a photo ID, and the caption itself. If somebody removed a caption, it was replaced with an empty string instead of deleting the record or setting a flag. So if the caption is empty or white space or null or something like that, we're going to ignore and exclude that caption. So that's the rest of that's the group's data. Anybody have any questions at this point?
No, John. Let me go through the Excel, and I will come back with a set of queries if I any have.
Okay.
While
Very good.
discussing with the team, they may have some doubts or clarifications. We will post it directly on the Slack itself.
Okay. Yeah. Very good. I'll keep an eye on that for updates, and I'll answer you guys as necessary.
Okay.
I will tell you that this was an eye-opening experience.
Very true.
So, John, it is
Really?
this sheet will be really helpful for us to write the migration. It is tough job because we were not having any idea on the existing DB designs. So this sheet is going to be our reference Bible while writing the migration scripts.
Yeah. So there are some things to follow up on your side. You guys can do that. There's some things Greg and I need to follow up on our side, and we'll get this done. If time allows Wednesday, we can address some of these issues then. The one thing that I do want to make sure we follow up on Wednesday is the parental issues for users. I think we need to figure that out. If Greg feels that's a showstopper, then we really need to address that. So let's be prepared for that conversation as well on Wednesday.
Yeah, that will be
Okay.
critical.
Sure. And Greg, do me a favor, if possible, please upload this video to YouTube channel, to UB Sports, because maybe we'll need this for the reference.
Yeah. Okay. So what did you want to load? I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just saying, you have the recording, right? So
Oh,
you
yes.
can upload it to the UB Sports channel so that
will
we
definitely.
can have the access to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I know that's really critical. That was a lot of stuff that we just got through. Thanks, John. That was good.
Yeah.
I'll do that.
Yeah, I
immediately.
think Banu, I tried to go through it as if I was doing the migration myself and planning how to script it. There may be more complex queries that you can make, so you don't have to go through tables on their own. And I would probably go through and use a temporary table and start building records in a temp table, that kind of thing. I don't know how you're going to go about it, but that was the approach that I did. Was like, if you go step by step, because I think that made it as clear as possible on what my intentions were as we go through and extract data from the production database. So that's really the way I went through it. Doesn't mean that that's the way that you need to progress with the scripts. You can do it however you feel is best. I'm not concerned about the process as long as it kind of gives us the same end result.
Okay.
All right, guys, I appreciate your time. It was a long time coming. This should have been started weeks ago, but it's done. So let's see where we end up in a couple days.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you,
Let's hope
John.
for the
Great
best.
job. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys. Wish you
All
guys
right.
Yeah.
a great
Thank you,
day.
John.
Cool.
Bye-bye.
See you guys later.
Thank you,
Bye.
Greg.
Yeah,
Bye.
bye-bye.